Okay, so this is the second video in the series. I'm Johnny Gager and I'm standing for a food and energy party, and really I just want to act as a catalyst to build up an idea of what the country could possibly do. Okay, so it's a catalyst for ideas really. Right, but before we start there, and you can check this with me, right? So this is all the current research that I've done for the next 15 videos that I'm going to be putting together. This one I wrote in 2008, which is called Refugee Economics. I'm really proud of the first line in here, which says that one person's life must be equal to another person's life, but this is not true in terms of climate change. But the basic thesis of this book was if we didn't do something about climate change, we would have loads of refugees on the move. This would create instability. We would then end up with more people from the far right, like Nigel Farage, the more sort of influential parts of the Tory party. They would come to power because people would be living in fear of climate change, but also that would increase food prices and everything else like this. Right, but this was written 17 odd years ago, right? And so obviously opinions changed during this period of time. This is really Refugee Economics Part 2, quite similar to the first one really. Okay, pretty cool stuff in there. And then this one was it. That's Refugee Economics. Refugee Economics. Yeah, and then we end up with this one here. Okay. So I'm just going to talk you through chapter 1. Now, as I go through chapter 1, I'm just going to read certain parts of it out. But fundamentally, when you look at the UK economy and when you look at the social figures and the social factors, we're not doing quite as well as people suggest. E.g., just some really huge figures for me. In the UK, we have the unhappiest kids at school in any developed nation. Okay, for some reason our kids are unhappier than other kids, so that would probably suggest the fact that we're doing something wrong with education when you look at that figure. Another shocking figure is that over the age of 18, that 15% of the UK population is on antidepressants. Prior to COVID, we had 85% of UK's GDP was in terms of national debt, even under the Tory government that had been trying to cut it ever since 2011. There were fundamental problems with the UK economy: budget deficits, trade deficits, and this was before even Boris Johnson came along and Liz Truss came along. The next thing that happened was, obviously in 2016, we went out and we got Brexit done, etc., etc. Now, for the first time in about 50 years, or the only previous time it probably happened was when we went to war, what the Tory government was able to achieve was they decreased the productive potential of the UK economy. Now, for two primary reasons. Number one, Brexit, which no one's allowed to talk about now because even the Labour Party, even though Keir Starmer was definitely, if I went on the anti-Brexit march, and Keir Starmer spoke at that particular meeting. But basically the experts said that the productive capacity of the UK economy would fall by about 4%. And that's exactly what's happened. Some people put it even harder than that. Some people put it 5.5%. Now this is really, really serious in terms of inflation. Okay. And the next one is the fact that COVID came along. So a lot of people over the age of 50, right, just decided to leave the labour market. Now, people will decide to leave the labour market because obviously they're not particularly happy at work. Now, maybe there's a reason for that, right? Maybe we are becoming a little bit soft, right? Or maybe it's just the case that actually people have just had enough of going to work because they're not getting very much out of work. So we can't lay the blame of that at the government. Maybe the government is paying pensions which are too high and people are just saying, well, actually, I can work part-time and I can collect a pension and I'll actually be better off anyway. So what's the point of working a full-time job where I'm going to get stressed out? But there are concerns. There are real concerns over teaching in the NHS that people just don't want to work in these jobs anymore. Why is this? What is going on a wider scale? Okay, So I really want to start looking at, sorry, I've left a bit of paper over here. So this is also part of the major book. Okay, so this is what I put together. Now, I haven't written all of this. A lot of this here is just articles that I picked up, but I've probably written about half of it, okay, in the space of 1 month. All right, so I'm not trying to be big-headed there, but it's a pretty rushed version of events. Okay, so what happened was then, in 2016, I just want to quote what Boris Johnson said. Right, so this is Boris Johnson's first speech in Parliament. This is what he said. He said Britain could be the most prosperous economy in Europe by the year 2050. A feat that would mean drawing ahead of France and then overtaking Germany. Johnson promised that British children and their grandchildren will be living longer, happier, healthier, wealthier lives. Okay, these are just words with absolutely no justification of how we're going to get there. Remember that boast that we're going to have 40 brand new hospitals, that we're going to have all the schools are going to be done up within the UK. Right, these are just random things. This is just someone just waffling on. Okay, so what I'm trying to put across to you here, if you did these things, right, and it would be the government leading the way, but with the private sector coming on board, right, we would then increase the productive capacity of the UK economy, which I talked about. We would also help to tackle climate change, which is obviously really, really important, because, right, if we become the world's best at this, we can then export, we can export the energy, yes, but we can also export the expertise and the ideas to everybody else. But we can also work with other nations, e.g. like China, which is enormously advanced in terms of solar energy and also wind energy. But we can also work with the rest of Europe. You know, the Germans are really good engineers. The Italians are really good designers. The French have shown in the past that they're really good at carrying ideas through. And that's why we do need to work together to try and achieve all of these things. Okay, we got some pretty good radical stuff on here, which I'm not going to talk about today, but I'm hopefully going to set up a social enterprise in terms of what sprouting is. And I'm also going to look into vertical farming, which happens to be, I think, the biggest vertical farm in Europe, just outside Norwich, which is quite close to Framlingham, which is where I come from. Okay, and once again, we all know what the main characteristics are. Okay, he then went on to say, right, so he then made a very big speech in Greenwich at the Naval Centre. Right, the reason why it's important is that Liz Truss also commented on this speech. And I just want to bring you, so I was going to learn the words, but I haven't got the time. Right. And just remember, when you're listening to this, that the UK, apart from Peru, and one other nation, which I can't remember, had the worst record in the world at combating coronavirus. We took the biggest hit to GDP. Right. Now, I suspect the reason behind that is because we had a slightly muddled policy towards it. Okay. But this is what he said in 2020. When barricades, this was before COVID came along big time, when COVID was appearing, but it hadn't actually hit the UK yet. When barricades are going up, and when there is that new diseases such as coronavirus will trigger a panic and a desire for market segregation that go beyond what is medically rational. Now, I quite like that because he's saying, well, okay, maybe it's not as bad as we think it all is, and with hindsight, we may have approached it differently. But it is a bit like saying, well, we're better than everyone else, and we're not going to live in fear of this coronavirus. Okay, to the point of doing real and unnecessary economic damage. Then at that moment, humanity needs some government somewhere that is willing to make the case powerfully for freedom of exchange, some country ready to take off its Clark Kent spectacles and leap into the phone booth and emerge with the cloak flowing as the supercharged champion of the right of populations to buy and sell freely among each other. And here in Greenwich, in the first week of February 2020, I can tell you in all humility, that the UK is ready for that role. Okay, so we are going to be the world's greatest nation ever because we're not going to be worried by coronavirus, right? We're not going to have a policy like everyone else is going to have. We're going to be Britain, we're going to stand alone. and we're going to end up with a worse record than any other nation apart from Peru and one other nation that I can't remember. Okay, so Liz Truss, okay, talking, because she was then, I think she was the newly appointed to the Board of Trade, said this was the world's best speech, right? Free trade is magical, it's lifted us all out of poverty. And yeah, I'm not against free trade, I'm for free trade. But I'm saying that if we have the opportunity of cheap energy and cheap food produced in this country, the cheap energy, by the way, would save us £1 billion a week and not the sort of fairy tale £350 million a week that we're going to save on the NHS. Remember that? We now have the record waiting lines in the whole of Europe if you want an appointment. Okay, all of that sort of nonsense. Right, this would definitely save us £1 billion a week, so we need to import that energy, and we could have food at reasonable prices. And of course, so I'm going to be attacked for this, going to say this is Stalinist, this is Big Brother. No, we've moved on from that. Technology has moved on from that. And actually everyone has the right to a certain level of having decent food, and we can achieve that. But at the moment, because we have to import all of our food, right, the prices are being whacked right up. We need to, in a way, you need to see the whole system. Okay. So we went through all of this, and it's just generally just talking about Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, and Chris Skidmore. I think it's Chris Skidmore anyway. They wrote this book called Britannia Unchained, which I now can't find. They wrote it in 2012, and honestly, if my sixth formers had written that book, I might have given them a grade A and say, well, that's pretty good, guys, but can you do some proper research, please, on it? It's just not very good, right? I agree with the general themes that, yeah, we need to work hard because we need to produce engineers, scientists, builders who can produce things, not someone like myself who just waffles away in a classroom, okay? No, in all seriousness, no. But we need these people. These are the people that are going to go out and create wealth. Not people who own loads of houses who just rent them out and we just have a rentier economy. Therefore, we can jack rents right up and we make loads and loads of money. And if we've inherited it, then we don't need to really ever work. That's not particularly good for the UK economy. Oh, just on a quick point now, I think this is a really important point to make. We have, out of all the developed nations in the world, right, the worst social mobility of any developed nation. Okay? So all this talk about, yeah, we can all make it in the UK. Well, it's remarkably difficult in the UK for various reasons. Okay, and we need to change that. So the vision, which I've already really spoken about in the first video, and it's all about increasing productive capacity, and it's all about energy. And if you can produce cheap energy, 1/10 of the price compared to the price at its peak, and we can also produce an enormous amount of food, then we're going somewhere. Right, now I'm just going to give you an idea which is right out there, which I will be getting into myself. So in a couple of months' time, I'm going to bring up this idea of sprouting. What the hell is it? Okay, sprouting is when literally you can grow your own food within your own flat, within your own environment. And actually, there is one guy who's decided just to live off sprouting, nothing else. And basically it's just growing a seed, and then you grow lots of little plants in a week, and then you eat all those little plants, and then you can grow lots of different little plants together, you can merge them all together, and you can create meals out of them. Now, this guy called Doug Evans is 56 years old, and he looks remarkably healthy. Okay. It's a bit like vegan on steroids. And I'm not saying we should go that far, but what I'm trying to suggest is that we have the opportunity of using sprouting to give us a much better diet, and everyone can do that. It is a bit of a faff. Right, how much of a faff it is, I've just started the process. Seems quite complicated and it will take me time, but hopefully in a couple of months' time I'll have learned how to do it, and I'll produce some YouTubes on that. Okay, and vertical farming. Right, there's the idea that like if we use vertical farming in the UK, that we can actually feed the rest of the world eventually. And this I describe in a way it's a bit like solar panels. So solar panels in 2008 have fallen by 95% between that time. I think the same thing will happen with vertical farming, and the big thing that they need is cheap energy. We can provide cheap energy at the margin at zero, so we can help these businesses out. And then we can have this idea of a super grid, which is where we work. In particular, Europe could work with Africa. Obviously, going to be a little bit difficult to work with Russia right now, but Europe could work with Africa. So we sort of join forces together, and we learn off each other. And so we'd have this massive, great big super grid covering all of us, which would cost an absolute fortune, but not in terms of the problems that's going to be caused by climate change. Because as I said in the book in 2008, eventually, if we just carry on with climate change, there'll be water scarcity. We won't just have like thousands of people on the move or even hundreds of thousands. We'll have literally millions and billions of people on the move, right? And that's really it. And the final thing, I suppose the final thing about the level of stupidity that we're in now is Lord Frost, who also helped to negotiate Brexit, who is also a big believer that Brexit would deliver us great rewards. Okay, I just want to outline how completely mad some of these people are on the right. Okay, previously we had Nigel Lawson, who wrote a book dishing climate change. Sadly, he's now passed away, but he did a lot of damage and probably put us back years and years and years. And the big oil companies obviously knew that climate change was actually going to take place, in particular Exxon. We now know that for a fact. In fact, they all knew it, but they all denied it. So as they slowly strangled the planet, right, they continue to make really, really large profits. Okay, so I don't really want to go down that huge route right now. But anyway, so Lord Frost comes along and he says, well, actually, climate change is good for the UK. Okay. Well, even if it was, it's not good for the UK, by the way, because our insurance bills will go up. We're going to have flooding and we could have fires in the UK, just like they have in Europe, maybe next year. So it's not good for the UK. And it's just going to get hotter and hotter. But his argument was, well, because it gets hotter, it'll be hotter in the winter, so therefore more old people will live. Yeah, but if you read the whole report, what about in the summer? And what about the fact that the tourism industry in Greece is probably going to be destroyed? It's getting too hot to walk outside in Pakistan, otherwise you will literally roast yourself to death. That there is a huge starvation right now in Ethiopia and across West and Eastern Africa due to climate change. Due to climate change, people can't survive, so therefore you will get more chaos. Therefore, you get more chaos. You will get more extreme groups, more angry young men because there's nothing better to do with their lives, and more refugees on the move because they want to come to Europe and to the UK because our climate is okay. No rational person, right? Particularly when 99.9% of scientists believe that climate change is a real threat. Okay, so you back the 0.0001%. So well done, Lord Frost. That is the craziness that we've been through ever since I first looked into climate change in 2008. Okay, so my first chapter is really just setting the scene of the bullshit, really, that's been generated by these politicians. That we would be, by the year 2050, the wealthiest, we'll have the happiest kids in the whole of Europe. It's just nonsense. We have to listen to this rubbish. Right, how are we going to get there? What I'm trying to say is, if we did all these things on here, right, we might, and I'm not the expert, by the way, so I'm going to listen to all of these people, right, and have a discussion about all of these ideas. But if you do listen to the experts, these are certainly with the Jeep Energy, they are definitely following the solutions that I've outlined in here. Okay, I've nicked their solutions really. This is not me, it's them. In terms of the farming parts, these are much more of my ideas, but I also lean very heavily on George Monbiot and his book called Regenesis, but just in terms of what he said, right? Very, very clever guy. But I'm also interested in this idea here with Doug Evans, which is a little bit extreme. But fundamentally, if we can increase the productive capacity of the UK economy out here, then we can increase demand. And then my big theory, this is actually sort of my theory, which I've sort of borrowed of someone else, is this: that if we can get the AS curve shooting out, and we need to get the AS curve shooting out through these things, because we also need to look after people, which is really important. We also need cheap housing as well. I appreciate that. But if we do all of these things, then we can use printed money to create the right levels of demand in the economy, so we're up here somewhere, right? And we can also invest in the right things in the UK economy. But you must have food and you must have energy sorted out. And that is the vision. Okay, thank you.